Welcome to Culture Talk. My guest today is Kathy Ross. In addition to being the Executive Vice President of Reasons to Believe, she's also Hugh Ross's wife and editor. So Kathy, you definitely know what it takes to write good story and have a good narrative.
Let's just say I really enjoy good story. I'm a lit major after all, so that was my background.
Yes, and one of the stories that we talked about recently was the blockbuster hit Wonder Woman. So you mentioned that allowed you to have an important conversation. Tell us about that.
Well, it was so fun. I actually was invited to see the movie by my sister and my nephew. And I didn't know what to expect. I don't actually typically go to superhero movies for whatever reason, but this one somehow was very compelling. So it ended up that at the end of the film, Jake and I especially were moved into this conversation about spiritual truths and about the biblical themes that resonated throughout this film. And it was a wonderful conversation about how we're engaged in a battle, how we saw the battle to rescue humanity. They're about to self-destruct. Here's this intense battle, which is, of course, what fuels every deep story, is that deep conflict. Then you've got these people that had to leave paradise, or what seemed like paradise to them, in order to engage in the battle, which of course reminded us of Jesus. And then we saw this question mark about where the source of evil is. And that led to a really interesting discussion about, okay, are people evil only because, if we could get rid of Satan, would that end all evil in the universe? Then we talked especially, and this is my favorite part because he gets it, as even a 19-year-old, that it took the male and the female lead characters working together to bring about the victory, to take care of the issue that they were struggling with.
Well, that's great. And then one of the things that you mentioned previously is that the film helped to show you how women can reflect the image of God in a particular way. So let us know a little bit more about that.
Well, it did lead us to a discussion about the way God created. In the very beginning, God created mankind, humanity, in his image. And then it said, let us make man in our image, male and female, make them. And so you see the male and the female as allies. In fact, that word ally even comes into that chapter of Genesis where he's talking about creation. And you see that each of these characters, each of the male and the female, both had courage, both had compassion, both had their strengths, they both had things that were weaknesses or that they relied on the others to take care of. So they weren't struggling with each other for who's in charge, they were just getting the job done. Yeah. And it was such a beautiful thing to see. And it just reminded me of how God, if we let him work in us, he helps us work together compatibly, as allies.
Oh, yes. And then one of the things for me is when I left the theater, I felt super empowered. So when we think then of women reflecting the image of God, how can we step into being empowered to embrace that role of being allies?
Yeah. I think knowing who we are is so important to our participation in the battle that we're in. We're all in a battle against the forces of evil and a battle to bring redemption to as many people as we can. And when we realize that we are a reflection of God's image, even the idea of unity and plurality, that really struck me. I don't know, it just stood out to me that here's God, a unity and a plurality, creating humanity as a unity and a plurality. We're one humanity, but we come in a couple of different forms, right? But we each have our own strengths. We're not the same as men, we're different, and yet if we work together and put our strengths together, then we're accomplishing God's work in this earth. And that's what Jesus came to give us the empowerment to do. And I think women just need to recognize who they are as part of the image of God and part of what he created to be man's allies and taking it to the battle.
Well, that is great, Kathy, and it's definitely empowering. Something that we want to remind our viewers here is that in addition to integrating science and faith to reach intellectuals, we really love integrating faith with pop culture like comic books and films and books. Yeah. What we see is that through fantasy, you can really point people to the truth of the gospel. For more on this topic, visit reasons.org and keyword search image of God.